Hi everyone. Thank you. Whoa, sorry to. Thank you for being there. Maybe before we start with my colleague, we'll start with a quick introduction of who is talking. My name is Vincent Berthier. I'm in charge of the tech and journalism desk for Press Freedom NGO Reporters Without Borders. I'm also managing a project named the Spinoza Project. I think we will have a chance to talk about that on our conversation. We are designing an AI tool for journalism. And I'm talking today with.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, especially after lunch. I hope you're going to wake up a little bit. I'm Eugenia Stamboliev. I'm a media researcher and a philosopher. So I'm both. And I do lots of, AI, media ethics, and philosophy of technology at the University of Vienna. But also, I have a project in Prague at the Prague University for Business and Economics on LLMs and democracy. So, and today we're going to have a little bit of an experiment, like a dialogue between us two. We did prepare, of course, but because we know our topics, I hope everyone can follow and we're not jumping too much. We try to keep it at about 30 minutes, and we're going to cover a few topics like what's AI, specifically Gen AI, how to deal with it in journalistic practice, but also then go back to what are the ethical standards we actually have, not only in AI ethics, but also in journalism. And do they overlap? Are there some kind of gaps? Can we draw conclusions out of them? What's new? What's old? That's kind of the most interesting part for us, was to debate that, because I think that we both have maybe a bit of a critical position, even I coming from the ethics side, but with a media background, consider many things to be actually quite old problems and not so new as some philosophers now sometimes present them to be. So we're going to start. And again, it's going to be a bit improvising and dialogue, and we want to have 15 minutes at the end for questions from you. So I hope this works out. And please, get involved. But if something is super urgent, just raise your hand and we're going to clarify. There
Well,
we go. Start. Yay.
sounds really promising agenda, but
Yeah.
as you say, maybe we should start by disappoint everyone and explaining how most of things we are talking about today are not that new, actually. Because of course today when we talk about AI, someone raised this point this morning, but when we are talking, we are using the term, the word AI as a synonym of ChatGPT or big language models. And of course, AI is much more than that. For example, we can talk about all these machine learning techniques that have been used in data journalism, in a consortium of investigative journalists, for example. But as RSF, we worked a lot on other AI systems that have been used widely to select, curate content, and that have been widely spread with social media and especially social networks. All those AI systems had clearly an impact on how journalism works, how journalism is done, and how journalists are doing their work. Because now, today, as you know, we have plenty of worldwide machine that are curating the content that you can see online. And all of these AI systems bring their own ethical issues, which were basically the same about the ethical standards of platformization on the media, the fragmentation of audience, the facts, the problem with disinformation, of course, and misinformation, which are not exactly the same issues. And more broadly, our media work to and transform their own practice to turn themselves in curated content machine. And today, for example, last week I was talking with someone working on the French media, and now they are experimenting an algorithm to curate content in order to make more personalized selection of articles of their audience. And all these topics have been raised with Gen AI, but actually they are using old techniques with old problems.
Yeah, that's interesting. So this idea, and we had this in preparation, like what's new, what's old. And interestingly, I kept thinking about my first and last, but now it's the second, visit to the Media Point conference in 2016. Unfortunately, the same thing happened, that Trump was elected president. So it's really tragic. I don't know. I would like to say some things are new, but something I just noticed today is like, oh my God, how is this possible? Déjà vu. There was a panel on journalism and ethics, and I remember back then, Aidan White. I remember him. He is the chair, I think, of the British ethics journalist or journalism network. And the big debate back then was why doesn't Facebook want to have publisher responsibility? And that was like the huge thing, because they got out of it by saying, "Oh, we're just a channel, just we don't." And these questions keep coming back. However, they're of course now a level up, I would say, because things like ChatGPT are, I mean, it's writing the content. So you can't say anymore you're not a publisher. But then by putting in a little kind of, lines like, well, it's just a suggestion, we'd never promised accuracy, and so on and so forth. Of course, these kind of models or technologies also kind of skip the responsibility question. But the responsibility questions become increasingly complex. And one of the things that did change, at least in my view, is that we're not even talking about different actors so much anymore, but monopolies of certain companies that just completely took over. But we're basically having, the market and economization issues, which are not new to journalism, of course. And we're facing, by the way, the same things in academia. But they are the bigger issues than just AI, because at the moment it's, how do we, I mean, do you squeeze in things like OpenAI into education, for instance? Huge topic. I get very uncomfortable with it. But many of my colleagues, within a few months, also super quick, just accepted it and said, yeah, sure, it's an opportunity and it's amazing. But of course, in my brain, it's almost like, oh my God, education, and then one company should run it. Like, should this really be a thing? But so these things then become very new. Like, I've never had that before. Maybe, I don't know if someone knows an example where Microsoft, I know, totally understand, but they're not so much the content producers, while now OpenAI are just producing content as well. And then also we had the conversation between what's content and what's quality work. Or
Yeah,
is there a
but
difference?
if we can just stick a little on what is not new, for example, all these copyright issues, these copyright problematics about whether media is creating value for big tech and big tech should reward them. We are all seeing that, especially in the frame of the AI Act in Europe, because at some point we know that data quality, especially data from media and journalistic data, has been used and spoiled by big tech to design this language model. But we also have, at the same time, actually, in France, for example, most of editors going to court with Microsoft to force them to pay for the content in the case of the French law, which forced big tech to share a part of the money they are earning on using editors' content. So, of course, when we say there is nothing new, there is not exactly nothing new. Because, of course, we have ChatGPT. And ChatGPT, in my perspective, but I'd like to know what you think about it, broke a taboo. Like, no, the machine is speaking. The machine is able to talk. And it's an old project because since I think Norbert Weiner talked about it in the 60s, like if we should be able to create a machine able to play with words. But no, ChatGPT broke a taboo, and you have a software able to produce text. And when you are able to produce a content, as you say, everyone might think that this tool is able to produce journalism. But actually, journalism is not just about producing content. And this is why we should explore. But first, we have all these risks implied by this AI system, these social networks. Like, you need to produce more, you need to produce faster than before. And of course, there is a big temptation of using ChatGPT or any model to comply with this new economical system.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And now that you said Norbert Wiener actually wrote a story once on exactly something like ChatGPT. So these things are, of course, not new as an idea. That's also quite interesting sometimes to think about what kind of technologies do we have. We have management technologies, so they're not radically creative, interesting ideas. Yeah, we don't. There's an amazing article by David Graeber, who unfortunately died a few years ago. He was talking about the bureaucratic machines who are basically inventing and keep inventing. And this is more or less what we're doing. So it's not even good science fiction, So we kind of even left that behind. We're doing quite more or less boring stuff, but very efficient. So everything's about efficiency now, which of course is an interesting thing if it enters education, because suddenly even I have to talk to students about efficiency, but I don't really think that education has to be efficient. So it's a bit of a thing, even what kind of words we're taking on. And the other thing that you also kind of pointed out to, which is maybe a bit of a, yeah, it was previously maybe a dream of who writes or who's the genius who writes or who is the author. And this is also now quite interesting question in contexts like ChatGPT of thinking that superficially we might ask, well, is it me or is it the machine? But for a media scholar, that's a very boring question because it's never either or. But the multiplicity of authorship you're actually really having also as a material entanglement in this machine is maybe philosophically interesting. But it becomes a problem when you have to take accountability or responsibility later for the output. Because what's out, even now, missing output? I don't even say the work of someone, right? So, because it's not the work of someone anymore. Then, of course, I know I have people who say, but people always were inspired by previous and they took from them, well, especially in philosophy, true, totally true. Without any references, people just took from others and that was the thing. But of course, there's a difference if you take from other people without referencing or if you have their work integrated into your own, because this is now what's happening with the data entanglement in this machine. So, yeah. So, how do we go from here?
And I think there's a big difference because philosophy is a tradition. You work with what other thinkers have think before you. And journalism is not a tradition. It's about what is happening right now. And so
But you also have methods.
yeah, we have methods, but the major point is you are describing something, and the issue is about plagiarism. And this is my main problem when I see sometimes I teach students how to use AI and being critical. But the problem is that you can never be sure that your content has not been plagiarized from something in the database. And about the authorship, I'm always saying, AI detectors don't work.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So anti-plagiarism detectors work, but no one will use it on the journalistic content. But the fact is that you are still the author beyond the law, beyond a judge. And if your content is defamatory, it's not ChatGPT who will be judged. It will be you. If your content is insulting someone, it's just false. It's not ChatGPT because ChatGPT doesn't know what is truth, what is not. ChatGPT is just a writing machine, and in the end, you put your name under or above the article. And I think this is like the classic journalism responsibility. You are accountable, whatever the tool you are using. You are the author toward the law, and you must take your responsibility. That means you need to double check everything, and most of time, well, that means to be quick. Don't use ChatGPT to write an article if you don't have a check before every information. Like it doesn't make sense because you will just lose your time. And also, there is some changes in ethics, which are really interesting. It's about what is my workflow as a journalist, because obviously ChatGPT or something else can be used to gain time in writing something, in shaping information, in working with data. But what will you do with the time you've earned?
You will double check everything 10 times. So you actually, I don't think anyone's saving time. Like, I don't believe this. I know that's the main argument, but I've never really, I mean, for my work, I mean, I've tried a few times because I don't want to be, and I'm teaching, but I've never saved time. It never really gives me anything. I don't know. It depends what kind of work. I know people in companies who say, oh, it saves lots of time. It's amazing. It's great. But if you have something on the line, maybe this idea also of journalistic, accountability and the traceability, which is also part of the Paris Charter that you also sent me, and this idea that you have to know your sources. You really have to know them. This is now basically disappearing, and that's for me, for instance, a very radical new thing. There's no way. Not that even in media studies, it's actually the origin, or it's always a bit tricky word. No one really likes that because where's the origin? Like, does something has an origin? But now it really doesn't, because now there's like no way you can find out. And this is for me almost like like a hypocrisy now, because publicly we keep speaking about trust. So important. Trustworthy AI. We have to trust. We have to. It's so important. People have to have the factual information. But then please use ChatGPT. But so there's two different levels that don't really add up. Also, recently there was a bit of a scandal that a professor at Stanford University, sorry, I forgot his name because it just happened last week, used ChatGPT to write a bill or to write a document against a bill on deepfakes in the US, and they caught him. And I was like, okay, honestly, I could be outraged and everything, but this is what was going to happen to all of us, like sooner or later. And who knows? I mean, everyone uses now ChatGPT, but then the outrage is horrific if someone turns out to be suddenly using it and making a mistake. So we're kind of drifting into also complete reactionary modes of what do we consider as a mistake, and what do we consider as legitimate practice, and none of them is really factual or fictitious or nothing. It doesn't really fall into those categories, I think. But of course, we do consider publicly that things like truth are a possibility suddenly, and before we didn't really talk about these things so much.
Yes, and we are actually missing the point, because the point is not if we are using AI or not, if
Yeah.
was the text good or not, was it
Yeah.
relevant or not, and probably it was not, but I'm not sure because I don't know the story. But of course, about the trustability, we have to distinguish something, I think, which is the difference between ChatGPT, which is a public an app designed for the public, and using API and designing your own tools, which can be really useful actually, because and this is why something I observed on the field, because journalists, when they want to use a sophisticated approach on this tool, they are not using ChatGPT as a media, because this is what actually most of people are doing. They are asking ChatGPT knowledges, and then they want the tool to produce information, but they are using it as just a robot, an agent, saying, okay, this is my data, and then you create a sum up or create suggestion, but I'm in charge of the data. And this is actually what we are doing with the Spinoza project. We are building an AI tool about climate change, but it's quite an open framework, and you can do whatever you want. And the algorithm is prompt just to produce synthesis of IPCC reports, French text of law, press articles, and actually it's quite useful and efficient. But to be sure that it's useful and efficient, we have to quote every sources. We have to be able to access quickly to the original documents, and this is I think the next step on thinking about ethics in AI. In journalism, it's more about thinking about ethic in media and how you invest and how you design trustworthy tools, because trustworthy AI, it's kind of paradox, but trustworthy tool, how they work and how to use them. I think this is a good approach.
So, can you tell me actually a bit more about the Spinoza project idea? And because so one thing I find interesting, and that's why I'm asking as well, because ethically there's always a bit this idea of maybe because we work so normatively that there's always one thing, so it's never about collective responsibility or collective decisions. And actually, as you told me, that there are many journalistic, or publishing houses coming together,
Yeah,
which I find interesting because I see the other tendency now that every newspaper wants to do their own LLM very quickly. And yeah, where is this then leading?
yeah.
I think.
First of all, we are not building our own large language models because we don't have the money. And second, we are working with more than 100 French media. Most of them are local news. They agreed to share some database of press articles that they published. It's a closed beta now, but soon we will open source it without any sensible data such as the press articles. And basically, we just made several workshops and say, okay, what do we want to do with AI? What don't we want to do? And we decided, first workshop, first minute, we won't produce any articles with the machine. We won't use the machine to produce journalistic content, but we will use it to produce something that could be helpful for climate journalists, and meaning access to scientific, precise, and complex information. And then we started to design this tool. We clearly separate different kind of data. IPCC is not law, and law is not press article. So it could be more useful to produce information. And of course, everything is transparent, is open. We are developing, prototyping it. We're using GPT-4, but you can switch to whatever language model you want. It will work. You just add some time to, we write a little the prompt, but it will work. And beside of the tech work, we are also producing all the documentation to be sure that every journalist with a small IT background will be able to personalize it very quickly, including changing the databases. But every single piece of content within these databases has been selected by a journalist. And this is why we have today journalists using it. It's because they trust the machine, because they trust the people who designed it.
It's quite interesting, this idea of trust, which is also something I look into a lot. Not so much actually, because I think that I want people to trust AI. So I have a bit of a different approach. I started looking into trust research because I'm more interested in distrust, and if there can be a productive side to it. And now realize that there's something I call a loop of distrust happening, or mistrust. Sorry, I know that you did also distinguish. Sometimes we go back and forth. It also depends which language you use. Because I noticed that one of the side effects I don't like now so much, even if I'm quite critical with AI, is that we're constantly occupied about looking at things, if they're real or not, or is it AI or not, and we attach truthfulness also to AI or not AI. There was a very interesting article recently, or a research article though, from the Reuters Institute, colleagues of mine as well, who do amazing work. And the headline was, just because it's not AI doesn't mean it's false, and just because it's human made doesn't mean it's correct. And you can see many discussions are now so occupied on that we're missing the point in the background. For instance, coming back to the old stuff, like certain things were already there before, and you have a few agenda settings from certain media outlets and so on, who definitely will have their more creative approach to information and to method and to sources than other ones. And even this idea now occupies, okay, it's the only focus is AI, and once we control AI, we control also we can come back to truth or to trust. And I think this is very problematic. And I'm starting at this very moment a project on the European digital identity wallet, which is a decentralized system in Europe, and we want to really explore that, like what kind of trust systems do play into this, because it's not just the technical implementation. It will be also like which country trusts into their governments, and what country doesn't. And these things play all the time into this idea of AI. So even today, or just when we came in, this question of where are you and are having this discussion, so what kind of media and where, of course this comes into it as well, like what kind of journalistic frame are you really debating, in which country are you in a democracy, are you not, and so on. I know this goes too far now, but these things of course play into AI. And no, I don't agree with very westernized views that we are the good guys and we know exactly what the truth is, and it was very, very dangerous if AI goes into the hands of the bad guys, because who decides? I mean, yeah, we're not the moral authority.
It's really interesting
Yeah.
because when we talk about trust in digital world, we are talking about centralization.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, everyone is aware about what's happening with Twitter, with X and Blue Sky, which is a decentralized network and allegedly more trustable. I don't think so. And the problem is that with Gen AI, this is the same thing. Like we have a few AI providers right now. Basically, they are using a Uber strategy, which is to break the cost and then a winner takes it all. And so at some point, we will be in the situation where OpenAI or Microsoft or Meta, or whoever, will centralize a massive global tool of production of content. This is a kind of danger. It's actually an ethical standard that does not appear in any charter that I've read so far. Except, well, the one NSF contribute to the Paris Charter on AI, but it's underlined. It's a principle that say that your system have to be auditable by a third party. But today it's not the case. Like it's basically impossible, because if you are using OpenAI, no one can audit it. And it reminds me that when you take a look of Gen AI ethics and journalism, and if you have a look on more broader digital ethics, there is a lot of things that are missing because everyone is really focused on quality of information and media sustainability, basically, and the right to innovate. But for example, very few charters are talking about the carbon footprint of AI. And is it
Yes.
responsible to use it, for example, if you are working on climate change issue? We managed to have this kind of reflection on Spinoza because it's about climate change, but also about the social condition of all these tools are designed, because it's not just a fancy and very chic Silicon Valley technology. It's a social nightmare for most of moderators. It's the same problem with platforms. This is an obsession to say it's old, but it's actually old, and actually no one ever fixed this issue.
It's quite interesting that you say what's kind of missing on certain charters or even policy work. I keep being shocked about the fact that very often, if not always, but I'm not 100% sure, but like labor issues are mostly missing from ethical frameworks. It's just never there because no one, when labor, I mean, come on, it's not really a factor, right? Well, it's the biggest one in AI. So, and then of course, certain debates drift into those consciousness debates where AI is super autonomous and conscious and amazing and the newest thing. But actually, we don't talk about that there's so much labor in it that we cannot really consider it even close to being something like conscious. So it's factually basically impossible. But of course, in ethics, if they are very strictly ethical conversations, it's not so much about people. And it's also not so much about environments. It's about the very abstract things, which make sense at some point, totally fine. But there's lots of things missing there too. Like AI ethics became almost like and I'm in the field, and yet around me, almost no one wants to use the term anymore because it got completely occupied by industry. So because now everyone's an AI ethics expert, and it became almost a bit weird to say you're doing AI ethics because well, you're going to preach up the 10 bullet points that are very important and go home. And that's it. And things like environment or still, gender disbalance, it's hugely discriminatory. So, how am I going to tell my students to use something that will definitely misrepresent them? Um, well, just prompt better. Yeah, it's not the solution really to just prompt around. So yeah, so how we're dealing with certain things in this sense, or can we find a good kind of let's see. We have to conclude, so or we should maybe to have more questions. Is there actually I don't know some things where we could be quite relaxed about certain developments, or say, well, some things are going in a good direction anywhere, or it will not self-regulate. That's the wrong term, but a few things are there. No, no, you think we're doomed.
Well, I think that there is too much uncertainty on the future, because basically the AI economy right now is a bubble, and maybe this bubble will collapse, maybe not. I don't know. And the business model of AI in itself, it's not really sustainable, because you are paying for every time you are using and requesting a token. So it's not really convenient to think a business model for media, because every time you are using the system, you pay. So it's not just for very pragmatical reason. For budgeting things, it's really not convenient at all. And I think there is a need for more changes on the economy, on the regulation. I don't trust self-regulation. I think I think self-regulation does work when everyone is equal around the table, and this is not the case today. And so I can't answer to your question because the future is not certain at
Okay,
all.
well, not pessimist, but I'm usually extremely critical. But one thing always comforts me now recently because I do see already things changing, and that might be my bubble in academia because some things are very terrifying. But the other thing I can see is in the amount of production you have with these kind of technologies, they become very redundant. And I don't know if you all notice that. I don't see. I mean, I'm so bored by now by reading ChatGPT texts that even I tell my students, like, please keep in mind, I don't forbid them, by the way, because I don't think there's a point, but I tell them, please keep in mind, I'm reading 70 of the same essays, like exactly the same ones. So it's not just you doing this. And sometimes they start with the same sentence. Like, I wish I had more time to really analyze it because it's almost like an art project sometimes. And of course that's scary, but I think this will start to be a bit more I hope so. At least this happened also with robots when they realized that after a few months, those assistant kind of, I know they don't really work still, but there was a time when I was doing robot ethics and was like, oh my God, robots are taking over and they're all there, da da da. But then people became bored very quickly. So there could be, in some ways, a certain boredom level. And I do hope that in good journalism, in academia, in knowledge production, there will be always a human element there. You will need to have, or niche kind of elements. And of course, we also had the debates, well, is it democratic enough to say, for some people, quality will be important, but what's happening with the others, So I do get the point that I'm not sure, but I very much rely on boredom as something that will get us off this kind of hypey thing at the moment. Because at the moment, still, it's fascinating this thing writes. But after the 50 text, you're like, okay, it's exactly the same thing. And they cannot really change so much the scaling anymore. So I don't think there's so much more going to happen radically. So I think we'll get bored. And by the way, I'm increasingly being asked now to correct ChatGPT stuff because people cannot see through anymore, also in grant application or in journal submissions, because there's so much of the same that they actually need people now to look over because we can find, okay, what's happening here? Is this quality or not? And yeah, so I don't really think in a few ways, but yeah. Or, oh, sorry, the other thing. I just also read it somewhere in a very financial magazine, so I was a bit shocked that they wrote about it. I'm not sure OpenAI will still exist in a few years. I'm quite sure they're gonna go bankrupt, but yeah, that's just my.
Yeah,
But you heard it here first. Yeah.
you know that.
I'm kidding. Yeah. OpenAI might go bankrupt. I mean, who knows? So I had this discussion so many times. You never know. Companies are not there forever, and yeah, maybe we shouldn't rely too
But
much.
you know what Microsoft CEO said
Mhm.
about that? Like, the good thing with court is that they are in trials, and then the fact that Americans are doing trials every day is that they are forced to publish some emails. And Microsoft CEO just say, if OpenAI disappeared, this is no big deal because we are around them, above them, and inside them.
Yeah, of course. In their case, yeah, this is this is
So basically,
okay.
if I have to bet,
It's true.
if I have to bet, I would
Oh,
bet that the OpenAI will disappear somehow. That the tech won't disappear and Microsoft will. And basically, we are. I know it's a loop, but basically everything will be the same issues but worse.
no, I mean, of course, and now to get to the dark side and to end with it. No, and the sad part will be that even if these kind of companies exist only for 2 or 3 years, they have disrupted so many industries and killed off so many things, even just education. I'm not sure how then to go back from that. So that's another, problem. Or journalism, like so many outlets or so many independent, tinier or smaller ones were, yeah. Well, but we're hopeful. Well, I don't know. To be, should we leave it here and open to the
Yeah, we should open to the floor. I think it's time.
yes questions, please?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm just going to try to summarize my 2 hour long question. And I'm so thankful that you brought up the trust issue. That's very expensive to me. And I just want to hear a little bit more because you mentioned something like education and efficiency in education. And you mentioned something about regulation. So you don't believe very much in regulation. So how to bring this all together? Like for me, in my opinion, one of the ways to reinforce trustworthiness perception in AI would be through like media literacy, for example, to teach students not only to use ChatGPT, but to detect when things are synthetically made. And I think that regulation somehow would be a way to, I don't know, to try to keep things under control. I don't know. So I just wanted to bring this all together and give you this very hard ball.
Um, yeah, great question, and thank you so much. And I hope you don't mind me saying now two very oppositional things, but I really have those two opinions at the same time. I would never say don't do media literacy, and yet I'm the most critical one with the term media literacy because I've looked into media literacy studies and so on, and it became more critical, but it's not really. I mean, one thing media literacy history or things have learned, you cannot educate someone into being the citizen you want them to be. And this is very often the project behind that it's by like us for just educating those, kind of stupid, too emotional, people, into just being like us, more or less. And this is sometimes and if we don't say it, we still pretend that we just have to teach people how to use AI critically. Um, I see the tendency extremely drifting into tech education, skills training, and that's it. And now, and then the pragmatics kick in. Like, I would love to have more political education, but then I've seen what this means, because who controls this political education? If you do this in Hungary, it's going to be a different one than in France. If you do this in Bulgaria, it's going to be different. So, you know what I mean? It's not there is no real educating people. Yeah, the minute it becomes political, and AI is political, and literacy is something you can always just talk about criticality, but who does the criticality is absolutely crucial. And especially the last years, we noticed that the word critical citizen or critical thinking has become, the opposite of what was like. Yeah, it's just taken over ideologically by different groups. And just a little final anecdote, and I hope you can continue. I had to give I had to be in a talk in a panel the day Trump won the election, now in a journalistic panel in Vienna, and it was about trust and factuality. And I really didn't know what to do, because I don't like the discussion, and I'm very much on board with a colleague of mine, Johan Farkas, who's in Copenhagen, who says, it's the whole post-factual. We have to be really very careful about these debates, because we end up polarizing, into we are the smart, truthful people, and the other ones were just the non-educated, stupid, or we even assume that there's a truth origin we can go back to once we eradicate the issues we have. And they're just about information. So basically, just inform people, then they go back to the facts. I don't believe in that. But of course, I was very popular then, because I tried then to be, and people were like, what? But why? What do you have against facts? And I'm like, it's not, it's so much more complicated than that. So much more complicated. It's otherwise you make it about an informational and not ideological and political campaign. And in education, it's even more complicated, because how do you make it a neutral discussion? And unfortunately, I do see most of them just being about teach kids how to use AI. And I really have a problem with that. Yeah.
Well, on media literacy, I have the same position as you, that you can't be against media literacy, but you can say that it's useful to solve the problem. Not why you can be against. You can be against because when you fight for press freedom, you fight for democracy. It's basically the same thing. And if you fight for democracy, you are always in favor of education. The problem is that today our problem is not about people not being educated enough. The problem is with people having a global movement of mistrust towards every institutions, including media. And if you say, oh, you should trust the media, you are not solving the problem. You are just ignoring it. And that's why I'm not against regulation. I'm against self-regulation. The fact that big techs could regulate themselves. I don't have a lot of hope on regulation, despite, well, I'm doing my best, and we are doing a lot, especially toward Europe. But if we look at the AI, Artificial Intelligence Act, for example, you have some high-risk system models. You have, of course, forbidden system, such as everything would could be the same as in China, like social credit, etc. Every dystopian system model. But on high risk, you have the systems connect to education, to justice, and of course, this is high risk, but you have nothing towards information. Like, and we publicly regretted it. Like, if you have a system involved in disseminating information content, it should be considered as high risk, because it's so important for democracy. But no, for Europe, it was not concerned by the involved by the iris system, because I don't know, maybe it was information is just a cultural content as another. So we need to reinforce the regulation in order to frame the machine into something that we want, and that's something that we as citizens, not only as policymakers. So there is a more global work to do, a political work to achieve, and of course continue media literacy, because it's fine. And you can see some countries like Finland, for example, where it's really useful, but they are a more global strategy on that. It's not just about teaching kids to read newspapers. Exactly.
But it's
You
also
need to
harder to do it with democracies where everything works. How are you teaching kids that the AI is definitely going to discriminate them? I mean, good luck with selling this. So I don't think we're really honest in this debate. Like, if you really teach media literacy, you have to teach this thing will discriminate you if you're brown, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, and so on and so forth, because this is what it does. So how do you teach that? So I think we are teaching ideal situations, but we don't. But then it doesn't apply because most people are still discriminated by those technologies. So if we do real media literacy, it will be radical, and then it will be forbidden. It will be not allowed. I'm absolutely sure, because then you won't use AI. It's really. It's. I think it always gets political. Yeah.
Can we zoom out? Because I don't disagree. I mean, everything resonates, and despair is an important part of the authoritarian playbook, right, and toolkit. And I'm feeling you've given me good details, and I'm feeling like we're in a moment of despair. And
Oh, no, 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 no.
no, okay,
It's just
I wouldn't say despair is very passive in a way. I'm not. I
okay,
don't feel
okay,
passive. Yeah.
that's fine. That's fine. I'm trying to think about how we look to potential solutions, right? And thank you, no thank you, Eugenia, for reminding us of 2016 and the fever dream of being here at that time.
This is unbelievable. Yeah.
And having a conversation at that time, which was, the narrative around the appeal of a politician like Trump because he says what he thinks. And the reality is that this was a good moment in Media Point then, because the reality is, no, no, no. There was no thought happening. And now here we are 8 years later talking about AI, and we're living in an era of id, even without AI. The idea that people start with their answers and we don't have the equation, so it's impulse, right? It's very different. And I hope this translates well. I mean, it's very different to say what comes to mind than saying what you think. So we're in a very tricky spot, and regulation, any last moments of regulation that we have in the US are gone right now. And that's not just pessimism, right? We know the playbook. Also in 2016, at this point, we were talking about, well, who knows what he will actually do? Who knows what these people will actually do? And the reality is he did everything he said he would do. So sorry again from America. We're looking to Europe because despite all of the challenges of Europe, there is actually some conversation that is about consumer protections here. Labor is still a word you can use here, and it's not a political context. It's actually labor or capital. So we have to be in a situation where we can look to places like what is possible. And so I wonder if we zoom out, if there are other moments as I'm calling you ethicists now, as people who look at like what are the other moments throughout history where things looked like technology was turning us to something that we would not recover from, where there were actually positive outcomes or turns that we can look to now for examples. I mean, we could go, you mentioned 1966, and I'll stop talking. This is the despair, right? What do we do? But you're mentioning, I think you were referencing Weizenbaum and Eliza, right? So there are great conversations that we as humans had in 1966 with the very rudimentary forms of this. But okay, so we're out of time, and I've taken up too much of your time. But can you think of anything we can look at for the rest of the day and moving forward that we can say, okay, how do we follow that moment in history, whether it was 1848 or whether it was 1966 or what?
I will make it very briefly, just because it's so complex. Um, because of the ELISA computer. But I'm not sure actually it was 66, but if you say 66, I always mix them up, the data.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter really. Yeah. Technology fascinates me a lot, and yet one of the most dangerous and problematic things happen because of the advancement of technology. But it's never only technology, so we have to be careful not to switch into techno determinism. If AI wouldn't be there, society would be better. I don't think so. It's very often also a symptom, but it's not only a tool, because it's not neutral. So it's a back and forth. I think one of the biggest things I see now that worry me is not technology, is that 1, 2, 3 corporations do technology. it's not so much a science anymore. It's not the scientific discourse became a corporate discourse exclusively. And this wasn't like that. The early days of cybernetics, I mean, so fascinating, It's complete. I mean, I am super fascinated by that. And now I'm like, no, thank you, because I have to automatically drift into an economic oligarch system. And I don't want that. And that worries me more than AI, actually, which is a fascinating thing, or thing, I don't know, network of things.
You don't have a place for us.
Just a quick
I don't think we're us in one
before
boat.
Marek send the chair to my face, but I think we are actually at the moment of hope. It's a paradox, but we are the society with really critics about toward what has been done before. And it starts with the atomic bomb, but actually we are a lot of critical thinkers in different fields, in the civil society, in academics, and we are able to create this kind of knowledges that almost no one was able in Western society and global society to create before us at that scale. So I won't be so desperate about the future, because I think we are able to create something right now. But of course, we have to take in consideration the fact that these big tech companies, they did not hold their promises of progress at all. And this is now time for the society to figure what tech should look like.
And it might be also that some things just prove economically not really lucrative. So I think that, even it's not my value system, the economics, but the AI at the moment, or many big tech, they're, speculative money is there, but they're not really gaining back. So it could be that. But then something else will happen, it won't just stop. I mean, it's a whole issue of if you prioritize neoliberal interests or, yeah. And the more now science mixes with these things, especially in some countries, it's more one and the same, the more problematic it will become. Okay, maybe one more question. Mark, I already see. Okay, one more question. Sorry, we're answering so long, but it's so interesting to debate it.
Sorry, yes,
Yeah.
just a great conversation. So just a quick question. A lot of the that maybe we can end on a bit of a note of hope, but a lot of the tech journalists or journalists who cover technology in the US are sort of looking to Europeans right now, I think, to step up and take a lead here in regulation. And do you feel like this is a moment that Europe is ready to step up and do that?
Well, actually, this is complicated because in Europe things are moving slowly, but they are moving anyway. And now we have basically the same commission as before, but with much more far right influence on the political decision. And most of time, far right is not in favor of regulation and in promoting tech toward democracy. So let's say, as I said earlier, I don't know what the future is made of. I'm not really confident actually in Europe. Yet I keep fighting in order to advocate to a European Commissioner into having a better regulation. I'm keeping to advocate toward European enterprises to design better tools and better products with integrating values and ethical design. But I think that, and I think it was the point, we
No, you switched it off.
we should not trust only Western societies. I think there is things that are being designed right now. Take a look at what is happening. I don't care. Take a look about what is happening in Brazil. This is a very interesting situation because you have, of course, kind of democratic issues, but a fight between a kind of democratic society, another democratic society, and big tech is happening. And I think there is a lot of interesting thing to take from what we call the global south. I don't like this term at all. But there is other region than Western societies that can do a lot of things, and not only Europe, actually.
Just a very quick tip from a colleague of mine, Payal Arora. She just published a book on from pessimism to optimism or something. And she talks about, again, we don't like the term global south, but completely different approaches to technology. well, at least it's a bit of a different thinking of, because in Europe, yeah, we're just, we're very critical, even with the good things we do. Just never really happy with them. So the AI Act, everyone wants it, but no one really likes it. So it's like very bizarre situation.
Okay, thanks. Just as an American, also feel like I need to apologize. And but yeah, I just hope. I mean, I understand your point of view, but I really, you talk about other parts of the world. That's true, but I think Europe has a real regulatory framework that doesn't. It's always been ahead of the U.S. or has been recently, and now is going to be far ahead. Even if you have this right wing movement arising, it's already in power in the U.S. And so, in that sense, you have a big head start. It's not. I'm not saying it's easy, but I really hope don't give up. Take this as a moment, maybe where Europe can assert itself more.
But then Europe is not Europe. If you talk to Eastern Europe, it's a completely different scenario.
Yes. Or North and South. Yes, but
North
you
and
have
South,
you have Baltics versus
Yeah,
these are Eastern Europe.
So some countries are,
And you also have very positive and interesting energy coming from Eastern Europe, because most of the time we are talking about Western Europe, like the old Europe, France, Germany, and so on. I think this is not the model of the future. And that's why at ISF we are considering exploring very seriously the possibility to create an office in Prague, because we want to be more close to what's happening in Eastern Europe and to understand better these cultures, these new regulatory ambitions that are rising in other parts of the world and other parts in Europe.
I think now we have to finish. Thank you all so much for listening and contributing. Thank you. Thanks.